Before we continue, I would like to confirm that this meeting is being recorded as part of the public participation process, and we will also use the recording to generate the minutes of this meeting, and the recordings are also shared via the websites from WSP as well as the data-free website for our stakeholders to access. I would also like to confirm that this is a public meeting that forms part of the scoping phase of the environmental impact assessment for the development of a proposed nuclear power plant. Because it's part of scoping phase, no decisions have been taken yet. We are really here today to identify issues, concern and questions, and so that these issues can feed into the terms of reference for the specialist studies to be undertaken as part of the impact assessment phase. So we are in the first phase of the environmental impact assessment. So if you can move over to the next slide, I would just like to share the introductions with you. The applicant is Eskom, and Deirdre Harps and Sadiqa Tofi will be responding to questions today, and Eskom will also present the description of the proposed project. And then the appointed independent environmental assessment practitioner is WSP Group Africa, and we have Brian Hayes, who is the project director, and Ashley Strong as the project manager, and the bulk of the presentation will be presented by Ashley Strong. We can move on to the next slide. Perhaps just maybe as an introduction to the guidelines for constructive discussion, the public participation process is governed by several sets of legislation, and the EIA regulations do provide minimum requirements that's associated with the process, while the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act requires that the process is fair, transparent, and that everyone has a reasonable opportunity to be heard, whether comments are contributed in writing or verbally. So our role here today is to listen carefully, to record all the inputs, and to ensure that these are considered by the specialists during the impact assessment. And therefore, when we open the floor for discussion and questions after the presentation, we will request that you please make use of the raise your hand function, and I will call on participants in sequence to ask their questions. You're also welcome to put your comments in the chat. All of the comments will be recorded, and they will be responded to in the comments and response report that will form part of the final scoping report that will be submitted. I'm going to ask people to please, I see we have a fairly full room here. So if you do ask questions, please keep your input concise and focused so that we can provide more people with an opportunity to comment, and keep your questions to a maximum of 2 per person. If we run over time, or if we need, I may step in to move to other participants to give them an opportunity. So this is really not to cut anyone off, but to ensure that we have fair access for everyone. Thank you. We can move on to the next slide. Just sharing the purpose of today's meeting, just confirming again, this meeting is part of the scoping phase of the impact assessment. This is an opportunity for you to hear more about what the project involves, and typically at this stage, the EAP may not be able to respond to all the questions, but the questions are important for inclusion in the terms of reference of the specialist studies, and it's critical for the team to understand what the concerns and issues are so that these can be evaluated during the impact assessment phase. So yeah, just emphasizing again that the team may not be able to answer all the questions, but they will definitely be taken forward into the specialist investigation. It is quite a robust and iterative process, and we thank you for your patience in this regard. Right, if we go to the agenda, we can just quickly share the structure that we'll follow during this presentation. Ashley will just provide a short overview of the EIA process. Then Eskom will present an overview and a description of the project, which will then be followed by an overview of the specialist studies, and then we'll open the floor for questions. And I think that's all from my side, Ashley. I think we can hand over to you for the presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I just get an indication that everyone can hear me clearly? Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Let's just move to the next slide. Okay, so we have touched on a lot of this already, but I think that just to give us a good footing into the rest of the presentation, we are here to discuss the new EIA for the new nuclear power plant. It's looking at a 5,200 megawatt power plant. We do often get questions about the previous EIA process that was undertaken some years back. That process was approved by the DFFE in October of 2017, where the Danafontein site was approved. So the Danafontein site is next to Koeberg, which is the existing nuclear power facility that Eskom has operated for just more than 40 years to date. The Danafontein facility was approved for 4,000 megawatts. It did go through a number of appeal processes, and last year in July 2025, the original decision was upheld following the appeals. But we are here now to look at a further facility for 5,200 megawatts, and that is currently being considered at either the Tuispunt or the Bantamsklip sites. In terms of just where does the look at nuclear come from? So it is really underpinned by three main policies and plans, starting with the nuclear energy policy, which states that nuclear energy shall be used as part of South Africa's diversification of primary energy sources to ensure security of supply. This is then sort of emphasized again in the National Development Plan of 2030, which also emphasizes a diverse and secure sustainable energy mix, promoting the investigation of the use of nuclear power. Then all of these then also were at the end of last year in October, the integrated resource plan was published. And in this resource plan, there are plans to have 5,200 megawatts added to the grid by 2039. But there is a note that there may be future consideration of up to 10,000 megawatts of nuclear onto the national grid, depending on the development of a nuclear industrialization plan. So that is where the nuclear look as such comes from in terms of policies and plans. In terms of applications, we've got the environmental authorization process, which is where we are sitting in the green block. This is where the to apply for an environmental authorization, which can either be rejected or granted by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, which is essentially the DFFE in terms of the acronym. The EIA is then one of the processes of a number of phases in this particular process. One permit that follows concurrently with the EIA phase is the heritage permit. There are a number of applications that are required to the Eastern Cape, as well as the South African Resources Heritage Agency, or SARA. These applications have already been submitted, and that process runs parallel to our EIA, and actually they are fairly linked. We also have to make sure that we have those comments in our EIA so that we can respond to them. The two processes that follow on from an EA, should it be granted, would be the water use license and the coastal waters discharge permits. These applications themselves, and often one of the documents that is required to support the applications is the actual EA once granted. There are a number of specialist studies required for both of these permits. What is happening to try and just provide input into this process at later stages, a number of the specialist studies are looking at the various the requests and information that these two processes would require and including it in their studies currently. The separate process on the right-hand side, the pink box, is the nuclear installation site license application, which is run through the National Nuclear Regulator. This is a completely separate process and is sort of part one of a number of different applications that are required from the National Nuclear Regulator. It is running in parallel to our process. And this process will also have its own public participation process run by the NNR or the regulator at a later stage. And I'm sure that it would be communicated accordingly. In terms of just moving forward, in terms of the EIA process itself and breaking down the process and the timeframes, we have two phases. We have a scoping phase and an EIA phase. The scoping phase is where we are currently with a draft report out for public review. This phase is one that looks at alternatives, proposes and recommends the preferred alternatives for detailed investigation in the EIA phase. It is the phase where the terms of reference of the detailed studies is determined, and this phase will need to be approved, the final scoping report, by the DFFE before we move on into the EIA phase later in the year. These dates are slightly off because the EIA timeframes do outline timeframes for both the public, the EAP, as well as the authority themselves. We have received a approval of extension of time for the public review. So where it was, the review period was going to end on the 5th of May, the review period is now ending on the 25th of May. So this will delay the process slightly going forward. So in terms of the next phase, when we would be coming back to the public with the EIA phase details, this would now no longer be in September, November. It would be probably November, December into January of the following year. So, but we'll look at where we go. But that's essentially the timeframes. The DFFE have very specific timeframes as well. 44 days for them to make a decision on the final scoping report before we move into the EIA. In terms of public participation, as Antoinette said earlier, it needs to be transparent. We need to consider all the input that we get. We capture every single comment, oral and written, and we need to respond to all of them. The comment and response report is probably the largest document that we will produce during the course of this project, and it is something that is submitted to the department at each sort of phase or deliverable. So there was one already with the draft scoping, there'll be one with the final scoping, and that'll move and continue to grow and develop through the EIA process with draft and final EIA reports later down the line. We are trying our best to try and reach people over many different facets of society, and also through many different ways in terms of media. So newspapers, radio, adverts, site notices. We've done virtual and in-person meetings. We've got hard copies out for review, but also online with our website and also our data-free website, where people can download and review the reports without having to pay for the download costs. And why are we doing a full EIA process? Well, basically the listing notice 2, you are required to then do a full scoping and EIA process rather than just the normal basic assessment. I think everybody would agree that this project is complicated and complex enough that a full scoping and EIA process is very warranted. We have a fair list of triggers that we have identified to date. These will be updated as we go through the process. And they can be added to and as we go. A detailed description of all of these and their applicability are in Chapter 7 of our draft report. Right, I'd like to hand over to Sadiqa now to take us through a short description of the project itself.
Thanks, Ashley. Can you confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Great. Okay, so thanks for that. I'll just go briefly through. I've got 4 slides just to take you through the key project components, what we're looking at, the deploying on the plant, how the technology works in brief, and just some of the safety aspects that we are that's important for us from an Eskom point of view. What we have in front of us is just a schematic layout, a cross-section of the key components, the important part. And it all starts really in the bottom left, where we are looking at the atom and the splitting of a uranium atom to provide us the energy that we need. And it really involves introducing a neutron into a uranium atom, which splits into 2. It gives off 2 important functions for us in that reaction. One, another neutron is emitted from the reaction, which then splits another uranium atom next to it, and that gives us a sustainable nuclear fission chain reaction. And it also gives off heat, and the energy in the form of heat that gives off is what we use to heat water in the primary circuit, which is depicted in the reactor vessel and the fuel in the purple section of the first cross-sectional diagram. And there we have a small, in the picture, a purple circuit where hot water is basically heated up in the reactor from the energy that comes from the splitting of the uranium atom. That water is cooled off in what we call the steam generator and returned to the reactor vessel where it's heated up again, and then that cycle then keeps continuing under pressure, and that's why it's a pressurized water reactor. And the water passing through the steam generator, as I said, gets cooled there. The other important function of the steam generator is that it generates steam, which is then used to drive a turbine. The turbine is connected to an electrical generator that produces electricity that we then transmit through the transmission lines through to our houses to where we use the electricity in industry and the like. The whole reaction is really controlled quite well in the control room and making sure that the plant is operated safely and the like. Another important part is the steam in the turbine is cooled off in the condenser, and that's cooled off by the green circuit that you've seen there, where we're using seawater as the medium to cool off the water in the condenser. What's quite important for us, if we notice on this diagram, the purple circuit, the blue circuit, and the green circuit, they are, the blue and purple circuits are closed systems. So they're not in direct, the water is not in direct contact with each other, and it's interfacing with the metal, and that's how we get the heat transfer going through. And the green circuit is connected to the sea, and we're using seawater to cool the condenser. Seawater is not in direct contact with the reactor vessel at all, and therefore there's no contamination that can happen from radioactivity coming into the sea because of the reaction that we're controlling. Everything is housed in a 1 meter thick concrete containment structure, and that I'll show what that looks like in the next slide, please. So, next slide, please, Ashley. The next slide really just shows the pictorially what the different structures will look like on the plant. As I've mentioned, the containment nuclear containment building, which is a meter thick structure that houses the reactor and the safety systems, including the steam generators within that. It's quite a large structure on the system, and that's where we control all the nuclear operations from. Connected to the nuclear island will be the power block, and here we will house the turbine hall and the electricity generators, which is connected to the electrical infrastructure, and ultimately the high voltage yard will connect through to the high voltage cabling and towers that will leave the site and connect to the national grid, providing us electricity. What will also be on the site will be the support infrastructure, like office buildings, canteens, laboratories for chemical analysis and the like, and the workshops for the maintenance teams and everybody. So those facilities will be on site, as well as our waste storage and packaging facilities for industrial waste, as well as nuclear waste, which we will ship, package and transport to Valpits, which is the licensed facility in the Northern Cape for the management and treatment of all radioactive waste currently in the country. Those items will be packed and escorted and submitted through to that facility for ultimate disposal. What's also important in terms of the sea, there will be two important functions in terms of cofferdam usage in the initial construction phase, and later on an intake and outfall structure or piping arrangements will be the final installation for the cooling water supply to the plant. That will be there. And also we'll be dealing with the spoil pipelining and see what the impact of that would be in managing the spoil flow during construction as one of the temporary structures. Another item, there will be quite a lot of water usage on site that we will store on water storage tanks and water reservoirs, and we're intending to use the seawater desalination plant for the power station itself. And really the intent is not to rely on municipal infrastructure for water needs, and therefore we are planning on the installation of a seawater desalination plant, which will require the plant itself and some water storage reservoirs for the water that we will be using on that. Thank you. The next slide, please, Ashley. So in the next slide, what we're talking about is we have not yet selected the technology as Eskom, and we have assessed from the EIA, for EIA purposes, we've defined a plant parameter envelope. And herein we're defining the worst case enveloping criteria that any potential vendor would need to meet to be able to supply us with a specific plant design. It's not a new approach, it's quite an internationally recognized approach that's used. Where we're specifying the limits, and within these enveloping criteria, we would expect the vendor's machine or design to fit within that. If it does not, we would not be considering that in our analysis going forward. And we have taken into account the worst case scenarios on what the plant should look and feel like. Based on the large parameters, and it's technology neutral, so it does allow us to enter the market and the market to then respond appropriately to meet the requirements within this plant parameter envelope. Okay, following on from this then is the next slide. It's my last slide. It's the important safety features that we are looking for in the new plant to be utilized. We are, as Eskom, requiring the new plants to make use or increasing use of passive safety systems. And this is really to reduce the reliance on electricity-driven machinery and the like, and limiting human action to deliver certain functions. So typically, when we're talking about passive safety systems, we talk relying on the use of gravity-fed systems, where gravity does the mechanical workforce. Okay. And natural circulation in terms of certain thermodynamic properties that we are looking at to achieve certain objectives through the use of natural circulation to cool our systems. We're looking at plants that are simple and have simplified designs, not overly complex and not many systems inherent in it. And really it's a philosophy of if there's less equipment, there's less things likely to break, and it really makes the plant simpler to operate, to maintain, and really to manage throughout the 60-year design life that we're looking at. A key component for us is the concept of defense in depth. And here we're really relying around multiple layers of defense to achieve and then make sure that if one barrier breaks, there's another barrier in place to prevent an adverse effect of an incident progressing beyond its design intent. As an example I use here often is example, if you look at security systems around a house, you have a fence that gives you your first level of defense to make sure nobody gets into the property. Some people have perimeter alarms and detection systems as a second layer of defense. You have burglar proofing around the windows and the like to prevent entry, and really it makes it your defense systems stronger and connected to armed response and the like. Those are various levels of defense in depth to safeguard our equipment in that, and these are the design features that we look in the plant to be met. And another key item associated with that is the concept of redundancy. And here we're relying on multiple diverse systems to provide the same functionality. And as this example here, I can say you have a certain pump that can produce a certain functionality, a certain flow rate at a certain time period. Where one pump would be sufficient, we would install a second to make sure that if the case the one fails, there's a redundant one available to provide exactly the same functionality. Or you may have redundancy in the technology type, where you would have one pump driven by electricity as a means of a driving force, or you could have a pneumatic or steam power using driving a little turbine that drives the pump to achieve the same functionality. So you have multiple redundant systems inherent in the system to support the safety of the plant. Another important factor that we've taken into account that we're looking for in the design is that the plants should be robust against extreme events. And here we're looking around robustness in terms of seismic activity or earthquakes. We're looking at robustness in terms of tsunami hazards, severe winds, hurricane-type winds, and the like, and taking those into account in the design of the plant. So we'll be looking around how robust the designs are to extreme events, to take that into account, and extreme temperatures and so forth. Another important factor, and really this is what we call a core damage frequency that we do look at and measure. It's a number measured in millions of years that tells us how safe a plant is. It's a cumulative effective number, and the lower this number is, the better it is from a design perspective. So that's one of the key items that we do look at in terms of that index to support the safety of the plant that we're looking at. Ashley, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we can carry on. So the next item is just in terms of the actual scoping report, what is included in it and where to find the relevant information. So in chapter 6, you'll find the project proposed alternatives that were discussed. You'll see discussions on siting, energy, design, and the no-go alternative. It is important to note that in terms of the EIA regulations, There are many different types of alternatives that can be included, and they all, when they go through to the EIA phase for consideration and further assessment, these alternatives must be considered feasible, reasonable, and viable. So in terms of siting, we in the scoping report have looked at, and the specialists have also looked at Bantamsklip and the Tasepunt site. So the Bantamsklip site is down the coast from Gansbaai and Pearly Beach in the Western Cape, and the Tasepunt site is between Oyster Bay, Cape St. Francis, Sea Vista in that area. If I just go back to the alternative slide, we also have a comprehensive discussion on energy alternatives, pros and cons of the various different energy generation options, coal, gas, various renewables, as well as nuclear itself. Then also leading into that description of various design alternatives, including footprint cooling, water issues in terms of intake and discharge, and looking at dredging and excavation, and of course the associated spoil disposal alternatives, freshwater supply alternatives, and brine disposal alternatives, all of which will be moving through into the EIA phase. The one important alternative that will be in the EIA phase is the no-go alternative, which is a requirement. And I just go through to the next. In terms of the Commission specialist studies, we have a number. All of the studies have been already working on their various studies. They've been looking at the impacts, preliminary impacts now in the scoping phase. We asked them to look at these impacts at both the Bantamsklip and the Tasepunt site, and to provide us with their current understanding of which of those two sites would be preferred from their point of view. As I said, there are a number of different specialist studies that we have got on the project. They also have, and their baseline summaries are in the chapter 8 of the document, as well as in their various reports that have been appended to the report. Sensitivity maps is something a little bit new, as the DFFE have what they call a screening tool now. And as part of the EIA process now, one is required to look at what the sensitivities are in terms of the various screening tool reporting items. This is the sensitivity map from the Bantamsklip site, noting a lot of critical biodiversity areas, which are the red areas. There's some protected areas, which are the green areas moving north of the site. The hashed area on the coast is heritage sites. We are aware that this is clipped just for the site, and it does move up and down the coast in terms of that sites are located there as well. Is similar, but there's a lot. It's sort of there's more distinction between a critical biodiversity area 1 and 2s rather than the Bantamsklip, where it's only CBA 1. Also, a lot of heritage sites along the coast, as well another nature reserve just to the east of the site as well. This is discussed in chapter 8 and chapter 9 of the scoping report. In chapter 10 of the scoping report, you'll find the preliminary impacts that have been identified to date. I think it's important to know that these are the preliminary impacts, and there is very likely that additional impacts would be added on at a later stage. The specialists have identified what further work they would need to do. They've already, on the basis of the information that they know currently, identified which their preferred site is according to their specific specialist study, which I will show you shortly. But in the next phase, there will be impacts, as well as reassessing their preliminary mitigation measures that they've provided, and really looking at options and re-evaluating, and this is where in the next phase is where the environmental management plan will be compiled. In terms of the preferred sites comparison, As we said, each site special study was asked to identify what their preferred was, which they did. This particular table is actually in Chapter 11 of the draft scoping report. And just as a summary, 4 sites were picked, 4 studies clearly picked Bantam's Klip, 2 studies noted Bantam's Klip, but also said Tastepunt was suitable. 8 studies clearly picked Tastepunt, and 11 studies were neutral in that either site was suitable. Further to this, we looked at more of the feasibility and the viability issues. We looked at the site readiness of each of the sites in terms of the NNR processes that are still to come, sort of where there are major gaps, etc., and still a lot of work that needs to be done. And here, Bantam's Klip definitely has a lower site readiness than Tastepunt. Further to this, the grid integration is more difficult at Bantam's Klip, and there's more sort of information available at this stage. Not a lot of information, but there's definitely more assessment going on from the National Transmission Company side of things for the Tastepunt side. So Tastepunt is further down the line in terms of their planning on how to integrate the Tastepunt site to the national grid than it is at Bantam's Klip. So Bantam's Klip is seen to be less aligned at the stage with the objectives, making Tastepunt definitely at this stage more viable. We have therefore recommended Tastepunt as the preferred site. This is subject still to DFE approval in the final scoping report. It is not guaranteed that the DFE won't come back and say we have to look at both sites in the EIA, but this is our recommendation. And I think it's also important to note that Bantam's Klip isn't fatally flawed, and it does still remain a feasible site for a nuclear power plant in the future. And that's where I end my story, and back over to you, Tony.
All right, thank you to our presenters, and thank you for sticking to the time so that we can leave sufficient time for questions and discussion. Just for those of you who joined a little bit later after we shared our meeting protocols, firstly, I would like to acknowledge the apology that we've received from the municipal manager of the Sarah Baartman District Municipality. That apology will be recorded as part of the meeting proceedings. And then please make use of the raise hand function if you'd like to speak. The rest of us, please keep your computers on mute while we have a speaker that either ask a question or respond. Then I'll call on the participants in sequence. All the comments that are put in the chat will be recorded as part of the formal meeting minutes, and they will also be captured in the comments and response report. I'm going to ask you to please keep your input concise and focused, and we are going to ask people to ask a maximum of 2 questions per person per turn. If we run over time, or if I see that we move close to the closure of the meeting and there's still a lot of hands up, I may ask you to stay brief. And this is really not to cut anyone off, but to ensure that we provide fair access to participate to everyone. So let's go and see whose hands are up. Michelle, please unmute and proceed.
Right, sorry. I'm just going to start with 2. The first one is directed at the EIA practitioners. The EIA only considers cradle to grave, but what about the decommissioning and the rehabilitation costs, which are equal, if not greater, at the time at which the decommissioning and the rehabilitation takes place? They are not great. They're actually greater than the CapEx costs. And that is a factor that many countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, the United States are actually finding out when they decommission a whole nuclear plant and they realize that they didn't make any provision for those costs. And there is no information or detail on how the site is going to be reclaimed, what you're going to do with the concrete from the containment building and so on. So that for me completely lacks, and it actually is a fatal flaw in the EIA. And the next question is a technical question to the gentleman from Eskom. Pressurized water reactors, old technology. It's not new technology. And whilst accepted that Eskom has experience with Koeberg and pressurized water reactors, molten salt reactors are the current modern design. And similarly, large reactors are really not the flavor of the day any longer because you're centralizing a huge amount of supply in a single space. So you're certainly not building for resilience. You're certainly not building for diversity because you're putting everything, all your eggs in one basket, as we found out with Koeberg, when Koeberg was offline for people throwing bolts in reactors and other reasons. There was a large chunk of the generating capacity in South Africa that was actually lost. So it doesn't look like Eskom has learned anything from that sort of event. And the other matter with nuclear plants is the costs keep on escalating. You're paying now for something that you're going to receive in 10 or 15 years' time, when the design and the technologies are actually outdated and old. We have renewable energy that can, or renewable energy installations that can be delivered in under 2 years, and the technology is up to date. It's the latest technology. Prices keep on dropping. Why forget about nuclear and actually look at renewables with a proper amount of storage? Thinking about baseload and renewables not providing baseload is a complete misnomer, it's complete red herring that has been shown in a multiplicity of studies and models that have been done. Yet we seem to hang on to this for unknown reasons. Okay, those are my two questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle. I appreciate that. Those are valid questions. Ashley, do you need me to repeat, or will you respond to the first question?
No, we think we got it. Brian will take the first question with a little bit from Sidika, and then Sidika can do the technical one with a bit of input from Deirdre.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I think maybe one thing that's quite important is we're not yet in EIA phase. So we're in scoping. So we, at this stage, identifying the focus and the extent to which we need to assess. So we haven't yet presented final costs, and we are doing an economic impact assessment as well. Very importantly, decommissioning and closure forms part of the process. So when we are doing EIA, and that will be done at the EIA phase, we will be looking at the decommissioning and closure, not just the costs, but obviously there's other associated impacts as well that must be considered. Sidika, I don't know if you maybe your experience from at the Koeberg site and how you're dealing with
Are you breaking up? I'm assuming decommissioning.
Yes, I'm just sorry, Sidika. I just want to ask in terms of financial provisioning associated with decommissioning and closure, how do you handle that currently at Koeberg?
Okay. I'll answer to that, and I'll also answer on the technical side, just add some context to that. In terms of the decommissioning, we are required to make... You can hear me, right, Brian?
I can hear you.
Okay, now I'm just getting some other noise coming through. We are required, we are mandated to have a decommissioning funding provision set aside for decommissioning around that. So there is a decommissioning plan that we have in place for Koeberg as an example, and it was all part of the LTO provisions that we needed to do. And in terms of new plants and in terms of the nuclear regulations that's currently in force, we will be required during the operating period of the plant to make provision for decommissioning of the plant eventually and restoring it to the appropriate level of decommissioning if it's back to green fields or brown fields at the end of its life. So we will have the funding provision set aside during the operational period for that, and that is mandated for us to do. In terms of the new plant designs, really the plants are today being designed for decommissioning and with decommissioning in mind. And therefore, the cut planes, for example, of the concrete and how the plant will be decommissioned is a key part of our requirements that we will be asking the suitable vendor to demonstrate is that the plant would be able to be decommissioned safely. So obviously the decommissioning process is quite complex in that sense. And large parts of plant on a secondary island would be free released and would not be radioactive, and those would be decommissioned as any other facility would be decommissioned. And the radioactive components would be transported and disposed of at the Valpits facility in the Northern Cape. And that would be taken care of in that essence. In terms of the comment around pressurized water reactors, the latest designs, a lot of the designs has evolved in terms of the use of the plants. This core damage frequencies has reduced, and the plant designs has matured quite well. We are applying the nuclear energy policy imperatives, which guides the decision around the type of reactor. And what we're looking at in terms of Eskom is in compliance with the government policy, which requires pressurized water reactor designs. Molten salt reactors is not part of that layout, and we currently are looking around pressurized water reactors, as well as in the future also considering the use of small modular reactors to cover some of the other plants that could be replaced with smaller reactors in the coal fields. So that's part of our plans in the longer term. But in the short term, what we're looking at in the next 10 years is really large PWR reactors in accordance with the nuclear energy policy and the IRP 2025. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on the second part of the question that Michelle asked, and that is why do we still consider nuclear and not renewable energy?
If I can respond to that, I'm sure Deirdre will add to that, and Ashley. In terms of the IRP 2025, all the technology options are being pursued from the country. Nuclear is one of those items. I think Ashley did cover it in her presentation as well. So we're looking at a mix of technologies for the country. And thanks, there's the slide is up, 5,200 megawatts would be nuclear, 25,000 solar and wind gas as well. So there's a lot of the different technologies that will be deployed by 2039, not just nuclear. Thank you. Ashley, sorry, Deirdre, did you have anything you want to add?
Sorry, you're just unmuting.
Yeah, thanks, Adika. I think it's really important to emphasize that when you're looking at that graph, that it's installed capacity. So you then need to take the load factors into account. And obviously wind and solar would have a lower load factor depending on how much storage you would add. And then in addition to that, we are actually starting to look at doing small modular reactors, as Sadiqa said, at our coal-fired plant, because we are shutting down 8 gigawatts of coal by 2030. And a further few thousand megawatts by 2035. So security of supply is really key, and hence we really need to look in advance at how we make sure that we do have security of supply, and hence the integrated resource plan has put this energy mix on the table.
Thank you, Deirdre and Sadiqa and Ashley and Brian for your responses. I'm going to move on to Cynthia Nong. You're welcome to proceed with your questions.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cynthia Nong, the Chief Director of Environmental Affairs. I'm in the Provincial Environmental Affairs Department. My comments is basically just starting with the public participation itself. I just feel like in introducing the project and giving us the public participation at the scoping phase, it could still have been you giving us more details. I did not get a lot of details. I am missing the details on the needs and the desirability as to why do we need this project, what is it going to be bringing in the province, how big is it. A lot of people have mentioned these things in the comments because we did not get that those details. Somebody's talking. And then the other thing that I wanted to find out is with regards to consultations with the political leadership of the province, because I don't believe and think that it is sufficient for you guys to just forward an email the way you did to the office of the MEC or even the Premier. I don't know if you're still going to consult them and how you're going to do that so that they are aware of what is being proposed in the province, because at the end of the day, they are going to look at us as the leading sector department to be able to brief them on these matters. But they need to be consulted properly and be written to. I mean, communication be channeled to them. It can be that you just forward an email of dear interested and affected parties to the MEC. That is not consulting them properly and sufficiently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. So I am going to revert back to Ashley to just respond. If you could just address the question regarding the need for more details, specifically relating to the needs and desirability of the project, how will it benefit coastal communities and people that are more directly affected? And then the second leg of the concern deals with the consultation process with the leadership in the province, that specifically the different authorities, and that protocols need to be observed, and that, by purely sending emails that cannot be considered as consultation. So if you can just respond, please, Ashley.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for your comments. We take note of all of those. In terms of the amount of information that is available, there's a number of different options for people to download the documents off the website, to different websites. There's summary documents, there's background information documents. We've even provided audio versions of the summary documents so that people can have a look at those as well. Then further to that, in terms of consulting with the different organs of state, all the organs of state are on the database. They are being kept up to date with the relevant information. They, yes, are on the email list. Obviously, the whole stakeholder database is. In terms of liaising with the different departments, we are working our way through everybody. We've done already in the beginning of the year, we did some municipal level and district level meetings. We are busy trying to set up more of those. So yeah, there are more meetings to come, and also will be more meetings to come in the next phase.
Thank you very much. And can you just refer our stakeholders to which chapter in the scoping report deals with the needs and desirability of the project? In other words, what is the rationale for the project, and also address the question on how would it benefit? What studies will be undertaken to show how this project will benefit coastal communities?
So chapter 5 of the scoping report outlines the need and desirability. Okay, there's also, if you have a look at chapter 11, it outlines all the various studies that will be done in the EIA phase with their terms of reference. Those terms of references will be updated in the final scoping based on the consultation that we have had over the last few weeks and also this week, so that those will be updated to include various stakeholder comments.
Ashim, I'm going to move on to Mary. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Mari Oosthuizen. I'm a community developer in the Oyster Bay area, working mainly on dairy farms. So I just wanted to know, in the construction of this nuclear site, the proposed one, we're looking at, I think it says to get to bedrock, about 6 million cubic meters of sand and soil that will have to be removed. So that is a lot of sand. It's the equivalent of, if we could just imagine a 1 kilometer beach that's 100 meters wide, filled with sand up to 60 meters high. So that's 20 stories high. What I want to know is how will this sand that will be disposed of, in which way? Will it go to the sea? How will that affect our chocolate industry? Some of the people on the dairy farms, their husbands or their family members work in the chocolate industry, and they provide an income to between 15 and 20,000 people in the Kouga area. So I want to know, in your studies, have you looked at what will happen if there's a lot of sand and other spoils going into the sea, how that will affect us? And then also touching on the dairy farms, will there be any contamination of underground water? Because our cows need the underground water to be safe. Yeah, I think if you could maybe just tell me if you've looked into that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mari. Those are insightful questions, definitely valuable. Thank you for raising them so clearly. I'm handing over to Ash for response.
Yeah, thanks. I'll answer that in a very, very valid questions, Marie. Thanks. Let's deal with the spoils aspect first, and maybe before I answer the question is remember that we are in scoping phase. In other words, at this stage, we identify at a high level associated the impacts or risks associated with the various activities that will be undertaken. So we haven't yet done the detailed assessments. That will be done during the EIA phase, where the various specialists will then go and examine. Part of this process is also to look at alternatives. Now, spoils management and disposal is one very relevant one, and you're very right. It is quite a large quantity of spoils that will be removed, and then that will need to be disposed of. Now, there's a certain component of the spoil that will but also got different.
Sorry, Brian, I'm going to stop you there. I just want to check if Brian is audible to our audience, or if it's just me that's experiencing an interruption.
Tony,
Is that
for a while? We've lost Brian. He needs to repeat himself.
Okay. Brian, thank you. If you can just repeat yourself, thanks.
All right. So maybe just to start, we're in the scoping. So there is, at this stage, we identify at a high level where those risks are, and the detailed assessments will be undertaken in the EIA phase. So that's important. So the specialists will go and examine. With the spoils management and spoils disposal, there are various alternatives that are being investigated. One of the alternatives is, and there will be a portion of the spoils that will be reused. Obviously, a certain grade of spoil. So not all spoil will be suitable for reuse. Then there's also a temporary stockpiling of spoils that will likely occur. There's a potential for land-based disposal of a portion of the spoils. And then there's also an offshore disposal option. So what is important, and maybe focusing on the offshore disposal component, with the specialists, when they examine that, and that relates to things like the chocolate industry, the ecological, marine ecological impacts, the sediment transport and dispersion, the turbidity and the smothering effects, and how this affects the fisheries and the ecosystem sensitivities. Those are very important aspects to consider. So they would look at transportation models, they would look at volumes, and they would look at the receiving environment. And on that basis, then they would determine what is the impacts and what are the potential mitigation measures, and then looking at the most reasonable alternative, feasible alternative with the lowest impact. So I can't tell you at this stage what those impacts are. As I said, they will be undertaken within the EIA phase, but they're very relevant, and it's one of the areas where there will be a lot of focus on. Groundwater. So groundwater impacts will definitely, at this stage, baseline assessments have been undertaken. We have geohydrologists. They have got a lot of baseline information of many years information available. The extent at this stage, the extent of impact, groundwater impact, is not a contamination impact. There's more risk of from a dewatering perspective, because the groundwater at both sites, it's not strong or high yielding boreholes. So that's why there will be desalination, and the fresh water use will primarily be through the desalination process. So there's not going to be a contamination. But again, during EIA phase, this will be assessed in much more detail by the specialist based on the exact volumes and quantities provided for the various processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I would like to suggest that, Mari, if you are available for the team to just touch base with you offline, that would be good, because I think you've mentioned some figures related to, families that are dependent on the chocolate industry, and that information would really be very useful for our socio-economic impact assessments that's all being undertaken. So if that is okay, we will move on then to Deirdre du Toit. Thank you, Deirdre, and thank you for your patience. I see the hands that are up, and I also take note of all the comments that are posted in the chat. We are not ignoring you. Your comments will be recorded. Thank you. Sorry, Deirdre, you went. Are you still there?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Hi, my name is Deirdre du Toit. I'm the General Manager for Taurus Chemicals Cape Kelp. We're situated here in Gansbaai. We've got a concession area to harvest Eclonia maxima. It is then obviously very important for us to have the opportunity to stake our comment in the proposed Bantam script development.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've just alluded to, I understand that there's going to be an active environmental impact assessment being done, or will be done, with the marine environment. Also, similar to Maria's comment, or Marie's comment, we have got only a fishing village here, and we are very concerned with the proposed impact of the brine and the climate change, what that effect will have on the growth of our Eclonia maxima, because we are situated in the Benguela current. So our Eclonia actually just thrives on cold water temperatures. So that's the first concern that I just want us to acknowledge, that will be addressed in the EIA, which I'm sure it will be. And then just that's just a comment. And my question is, will there be an actual in-person meeting being held in Gansbaai with the local municipality and the public? Thank you.
Thank you. For those, I'm handing over to Ashley O'Brien to just respond to the questions.
Thanks so much. So those further studies we'll pass on to our marine ecologists so that they can definitely take those into account. So thank you for those highlighting those concerns and issues. Then also in terms of the public meetings, we have had a public meeting in Gansbaai. I believe it was in the first week of April. We also have met with the municipality in Gansbaai earlier in the year. So yes, there has been some consultation in the Western Cape already. We had a meeting in Hermanus, Gansbaai and Pearly Beach during the week of the 7th of April.
Actually, can you please confirm so specifically if the impact of brine and will be evaluated as part of the study, and if there will be a climate change impact assessment as part of this?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. So there is both a marine ecology study as well as a climate change impact assessment.
Okay, so and the marine ecology study will look at the impact of brine.
Impact of the brine on the
fish and ocean life.
Ecology, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Thanks very much. We're moving on to Gary. Thank you for your patience. You can go ahead, Gary.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tony, and thanks to the team. Just two questions. The first one is, I note in the scoping report you referred to the 31st March application that DFFE had not yet confirmed receipt and not issued a reference number. Now, I'm assuming that that has taken place. The reason I raise that is that in your timeline, the DFFE has 43 days in which to respond to the scoping report. And then in terms of the final EIR report, the community again has 30 days in which to do that. Now, I would ask that as part of the scoping exercise, what takes place is that you actually go back to the decision maker, to DFFE, and that you argue a different timeline with them. That's part of the scoping, is that this is by far one of the most complex EIAs in the country, and you need longer time. In terms of the report, you already know from the scoping exercise that you needed additional time. Will you, as the EAP, then go back to the decision maker and ask for a longer period for, particularly for DFFE to make a decision, and also then for interested and affected parties on the final report? So that's my first question. And then, if I understand correctly, a NISL has been initiated for Taspent. Hasn't NISL been initiated for Danafontein, and who is the party that initiates a NISL? If you could answer that question for me. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Gary. I'm handing over to Ashley or Brian to respond.
Thanks, Gary, for that. So yes, we did submit the application to the DFFE on the 31st of March. That, as you quite rightly said, what we've stated in the draft report is correct. That has now been acknowledged. They will typically acknowledge within a couple of days. They have 10 days, but they normally acknowledge within 2 or 3. We have received the DFFE's reference number already, and that will be put on to future correspondence going forward, and also the final scoping report will have that. So just in terms of the timeframes, the EAP actually has 44 days to 44 days to submit the final report post submission of the application. And then once the final scoping report is submitted to the DFFE, they have 46 days to review it and approve or reject that particular scoping report before we go into the EIA phase. The EIA phase then starts the timing on that date that we get approval of scoping, should we get approval of scoping. In terms of the time frame, we are allowed to request extensions under Regulation 3.7 for the scoping phase and also the EIA phase. We did in this case request an extension for the submission of the final scoping report, which then allowed us to extend the public review by 20 days, giving people some extra time and then allowing us to submit a little bit later in terms of our timeframes. The department, they typically manage their reviews within their timeframes. To date, using the new regulations, I haven't had a project yet where the department has exceeded their timeframes over the years since 2014. So they're pretty good at looking at their timeframes. I can say that I think we've already received comments from them on the draft scoping report. So they took less than 30 days to submit that to us within their regulated timeframes. Going forward, yes, if we see that there is need for extra time, we will definitely request that extra time. The key challenge now is we have to make sure that it is completely unforeseen circumstances, and also we have to prove those circumstances. We can request, there's not necessarily a limit to what we can request, but we have to prove why we need it, and we're not guaranteed to get it. I know a number of times in other processes, we've requested extra time, and even with the circumstances in play, they've rejected those requests. So it is a little bit of a, you don't know if they're going to accept or approve or reject your request. In this case, we were very fortunate that they did approve our request. And then I will hand over to Sadiqa for the NISL answer.
Sorry, Ash, I just want to stop you there. Could you, before we go to Sadiqa, could you just share the comment period that's available?
The comment period, the comment period. It was 25th of May.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. There was just a breakup in the line there.
I was going to say, I was going to say it was communicated to the database on the 24th of April.
Okay, thank you. I see, Gary, that your hand went up after Ashley spoke. Is that a follow-up question that you had regarding the response?
It is. I can wait for Sadiqa to respond, but I would like to just check something with Ashley if possible.
Okay, thank you. Sadiqa?
Quick response from me. Yes, we have applied for the NISL for bulk donor-from-donor enticement. And it's an application you launch with the National Nuclear Regulator, and the license applicant is the one that does that application. So we have made that to the regulator as Eskom. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I'm going to jump to you to just ask your follow-up question, and then I'm going to move on to Siyabonga.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and thanks, Ashley, for coming back to me on that. Just to say that, I mean, you already have a scoping period that's gone beyond the 30-day period. It would seem highly unusual that you would then force your interested and affected parties to look at the total period, the total or the final report within a 30-day period, which is shorter than what you've done in terms of scoping. So, I mean, the request to you as an EAP is at this point already to raise with the with DFFE the need to have an extended period to go through the full report. There are 24 specialist reports. I think you're adding a few. There's no ways that you can do that within 30 days. So I mean, those are not. That's just unreasonable in terms of it, in terms of the period. So the request to you is the EAP, and that's what the response I was hoping to get from you is whether you will at this point already raise with the DFFE the need to extend that based on the extended scoping period.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, Gary, this is a request for the EAP to proactively ask for an extended comment period during the impact assessment phase.
That's correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. Ashley, if you can just respond to that.
Yes, and I can respond. And Gary, you're quite correct, and we will be doing that. We are aware that the next phase report is going to be as big, potentially bigger than the current one. and we are under no illusion that 30 days is just unacceptable for that review for the next phase. So yes, we will be submitting as soon as the scoping phase is. We have to be careful with our timing. So as soon as the scoping phase is complete, we will be able to submit our next request for extension, because we need to be careful when we request, because if they request, the DFFE request us anything that is new or substantial that we haven't taken into consideration, we'd need extra time for that as well. So as soon as we get their response on the scoping report, we would immediately put in that request. So yes, we will be requesting extension for the EIA phase to give INAPs more time.
Thank you. I think that's reasonable. Right, so we're moving on to Siyabonga. Thank you, Siyabonga. Thank you, Gary.
Good day, Ashley, and good day to the colleagues or members or attendants of the meeting. My name is Siyabonga Falangile from DDIT, that is Department of Economic Development, Environmental Affairs and Tourism in the Eastern Cape. Am I audible, ma'am?
You are audible.
Okay, thank you. And I'm responsible for environmental impact management. No, mine is just to check or to ask for confirmation. I've seen your communique, which was the invite of the meeting, that it was in 3 different languages. And when I listened to your presentation with respect to public participation earlier on, you did indicate that you would use, you will consult different classes, groups and staff. Just to remind, well, I'm sure you're aware of this, that the recent judgment with respect to usage of vernacular or a local language is very critical. I saw, like I said, in the email or your email trail that there is usage of, I think, the 3 different languages that I would say are predominant in the Eastern Cape. So you can just confirm that even when you advertise on the mainstream media, you would do the same. That's 1. 2, again, this may have been responded to by the gentleman from Eskom in relation to the question that was posed by, I think it was Michelle, about the usage of technology. You mentioned in your, again, opening remarks or your presentation that you only focused on the in terms of the alternatives. The only alternative you looked at was the no-go option. I just want to check if that is applicable to all or for all the sites, or again, you can confirm if the reason for that is because you already have different localities in terms of alternatives that you are looking at. Hence, you didn't consider then the other types of alternatives, which would also include technology. That's why I'm saying you may have responded in terms of technology when you were, or when the guy from Eskom was responding to Michelle about the technology that he said it's a bit outdated. So my question would be why wasn't there consideration of alternative technology? Thanks, Chairperson.
Very much, Siyabonga. I appreciate your concerns that you raised, and I'm going to hand over to Ashley to just respond regarding the languages and confirmation around the use of the local languages, especially in the Eastern Cape, not only in the invitations, but also the media adverts and at the meetings. Maybe you can just explain how the meetings in the Eastern Cape are conducted, and then I'll hand over to Sidika regarding the use of the consideration of alternatives of technology.
Thank you so much. So Siyabonga, thank you for your question, and I can confirm that we are throughout the process as far as possible using English, Afrikaans and isiXhosa. When we did the initial advertising last year, we did the same. We did it in all 3 different languages, chose specific newspapers, etc., to make sure that we could do it in all 3 languages. We are putting out the emails in all 3 languages and the SMSs. And in terms of any of the public consultation and all focus group meetings that we are having or have had already, we made provision for Afrikaans and isiXhosa translations, so that people can speak with their chosen language, and it has been going well. And we will continue to do that through the rest of the process so that we can make sure that everybody has a chance to do. I think also the background information document as well as the non-technical summary are also in all three languages, as well as the audio summary that was put up onto the website. That's also in all three languages. And you can download those for free using the data-free website. So it really has hopefully made it available to the general public as a whole. And over to Sadiqa.
Actually, I'm going to ping pong this one. I think you've already spoken about that. I think the gentleman may be referring to your slide around the alternative technologies that has been looked at. I'm assuming, just to confirm, if he is referring to renewables and all the other technologies as well as the no-go option, which I think you have covered in your slide.
Yes, so I did, Siyabonga, we did have a slide showing, if you go to chapter 6 of the scoping report, the draft scoping report, we have considered different technologies in terms of different types of energy generation options. There's a very detailed discussion of pros and cons of various different energy alternatives such as coal, gas, wind and solar and hydro and nuclear is all there. So there has been a considered discussion on alternatives. It is a nuclear project, so we are looking at that particular technology, yes, but we have considered it against the other options. And then finally, yes, the no-go alternative will be taken through into the EIA phase as it is required to be. And then lastly, there are a number of design alternatives that we will also be looking at. Okay.
Right, thank you very much for those responses. I see there's a thumbs up. Thank you for confirming. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, my two questions. First question is, the National Heritage Council has advised against the development of Tailspunt. It's actually on record. Yet this process seems to be riding roughshod over the advice of the National Heritage Council. Like it's a decision that has been made, ignoring completely what they have actually determined in 2025. So that's the first question. The second question is revolves around affordability. I said nuclear is by far the most expensive technology on the planet. It requires a huge upfront capex commitments. We're talking about trillions of rand, not just a few millions. We're in a country that needs housing and basic infrastructure to support decent living standards for a large chunk of our population that still has no access to basic infrastructure. Prioritizing and committing this amount of expenditure, trillions, should have no place, nor can it be justified in any way if it places a burden on the fiscus, who will be required to provide collateral guarantees as Eskom is a state-owned enterprise. In other words, what do you prioritize? Building a power station or actually building a roof over somebody who lives in a shack? Thank you.
Very much, Michelle. Good questions. Right, so Ashley, I'm going to ask you to direct the responses here to the right person.
Thank you so much. In terms of the heritage issue, we are aware that there is a provisional situation around the site as a grade 1 heritage site. We are aware that the SARA is still investigating this. It has not yet been proclaimed as such. and they still are within their timeframes in terms of the investigations. The heritage specialist is aware of this and is working with SARA. In fact, they're busy trying to get meetings sorted out to discuss it. So the heritage specialist is aware of it and has put in the relevant application forms with the Eastern Cape and SARA in terms of this particular issue. So they are aware of it, and they are. It is understood that it doesn't prevent development, but there would be various mitigation measures that would be required. But yes, we are in discussion. We are in discussions with SARA, but at this stage, from what we're aware, there hasn't been it hasn't actually been declared yet. They're still investigating. And then the second question, sorry, it was on the socioeconomic.
How's people's
Sorry, can I just make a comment on the National Heritage Council? It would be quite baffling if they actually changed their mind, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, maybe
it would certainly be as a result of exertion of political pressure, certainly not out of the work that they do. I mean, if you determine that something has heritage value, how can you undetermine it a month later?
Yeah, so an application was submitted, and I stand under correction. We'll make sure that we write this correctly in the comments. But an application was made by the Tastepoint Alliance to SARA for the provisional protection, and SARA then agreed to put under provisional protection while they investigated it. So it doesn't mean that it is or isn't. It just means that somebody has made an application for its protection, and the application and the merits of the application need to be assessed by SARA.
Which is still ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this is why it's critical to raise these issues, because they need to be included in the environmental impact assessment report and in the scoping report as well. And these issues will be in front of the decision maker when they consider all the information. I think the other point is also that these issues will feed, that you raised, Michelle, will feed into the terms of reference of the specialist studies. The specialists will need to evaluate these aspects and make their recommendations, the results of which will be made available during the impact assessment phase. Right, so Deirdre, are you going to respond to the second question that Michelle had?
Can you just remind us what that was?
Affordability. You're committing a huge amount of capital now, because I mean, you're only going to get a functional power station in 10 years, if you're lucky, probably about 15. And if you look at the ones that are being built around the world where the books are actually available for public consumption, they are usually somewhere between 50 and 100% over budget. So, you know, we are a country with much more fundamental needs than a nuclear power station. There are millions of people in South Africa that don't have a proper, decent roof over their heads. There are millions of people who don't have decent sanitation or education. They don't have access to schools. And shouldn't that not be the focus of where we're going to spend this amount of money? I mean, Treasury commits itself to guaranteeing as a collateral guarantor of this kind of expenditure. That amount of money is tied into the collateral guarantee, and it deducts from far more pressing needs this country has.
Yeah, so maybe I can try and answer it. I think, you know, it's really a fundamental question that South Africa needs to consider, and specifically the various different government departments. So in terms of the integrated resource plan, which determines what energy mix we have, and is also developed to ensure security of supply of electricity. Because, one of the basic needs is also to ensure that people have electricity and that electricity is available for economic growth. And we did see the impacts of load shedding on economic growth when we were in the depth of load shedding, and how it has relieved the economic situation since we have not been load shedding for the last couple of years. So I think, some of what you're asking is really assessed in the integrated resource plan. And then the other part of it is that this environmental impact assessment is but one of the authorizations that is required for this project. So it's the environmental authorization, it's the nuclear licensing process, but also the funding and how it will be funded is one of the areas that has to be looked at as throughout this process. But we need to do some of the assessments up front, try and get the various different approvals, and then we know what it is that we want to build, and then we can really look at the and what means how much it's going to be. So unfortunately, it's a phased process which requires various different steps, and the final step and the decision for construction is not made until we have considered all of the different aspects of such a project. And when I say we, it's not just Eskom's decision. It's certainly also going to be a government decision in terms of what the final decision is, including Treasury. So that, thanks.
Right. Thank you to our responders. I'm going to move on to Sally. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Salih. I am from a company called Oceanic Group, based in Cape Town. And I think thanks for all the efforts to host this meeting and discussion. I think from our side, one of the key concerns, I would say, is because Oceanic Group, as a group holding company, have other subsidiary companies. One of the businesses that we do operate operates from the Eastern Cape, which is our squid business. And just sort of touching on what one of the other delegates indicated or alluded to was, I think that our concern would be the discharge outlet, particularly of brine and the warmer waters that potentially could impact the local ecosystems and I suppose to a large extent the broader ecosystems that many of the fisheries are dependent on thriving in order to support the squid business or squid industry. And the Eastern Cape particularly has the largest squid industry in South Africa. And so that's the first I'd say concern is has the impact on the squid industry been considered, seeing that the power plant's lifespan is intended to be for a number of years, so you would have this continuous discharge. The second thing is, or the second question is, in terms of alternatives. One of the areas that I saw as part of the requisites is the authorization or the obtaining a coastal water discharge permit from the DFFE. Now, as I understand it, is that there is a sort of drive towards offshore discharge and not shore discharge from the DFFE's side. So in terms of the alternatives, is the project dependent on the approval or obtaining the coastal water discharge permit? And because both sites, the way I understand it, would be dependent on obtaining the coastal water discharge permit, and if that coastal water discharge permit is not obtained, does the project have any alternatives in terms of how it's going to be managing cooling water for the nuclear plant? And yeah, I think from a maintenance perspective of these offshore discharge pipes, usually they extend to about say 1.5 kilometers from shore, and there isn't enough case study within South Africa to support that such a pipe, given our coastal environment, would be able to substantially withstand wave action, tidal action, and so forth without being damaged. And if there is going to be any leaks, damages, then obviously the impact, it's not going to be 1.5 kilometers offshore. It's going to be felt a lot more localized. So yeah, I hope that my questions were received, and that you'll be able to respond. Thank you.
So for clearly articulating your concerns, that so well articulated that I got them quite clearly. So thank you very much for that. I'm handing over to Ashley. Thank you.
Thanks so much for those. So in terms of the various different impacts of the in terms of the marine side of the project, we've got a marine ecology specialist on board. We also have an oceanography specialist on board who's looking at the very issues that you've been speaking about in terms of the discharges and the cooling waters, etc. And they really are working hand in hand together. They've already done some work in terms of baseline and provisional impacts. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look at those two appendices from the scoping report. So there is already some information there. And then moving on to that from there, in terms of the coastal water discharge permit, it will be a requirement before anything happens or any construction even starts. The same with the water use license. So that would very likely be a condition of the EA. Should the EA be granted at the end of this process, the EA would very likely state that nothing can start until those various permits are in place. So it would definitely be dependent. Also, those two permits require the EA before as part of the documentation that is submitted. So they also, so it's a little bit of they work together. But it would very likely add that those two permits as conditions of construction start. So if that, I hope that helps answer the questions. It just simply, but hopefully it helps.
Thank you. Actually, I just want to touch on something that was also mentioned in regard to a concern relating to long-term maintenance. Should the environmental authorization and all these permits be in place, will the EIA consider these long-term maintenance and impacts should there be failure of support to maintain these offshore pipelines or pipes? Could you just give us some clarity on that?
Yeah. So yes, the specialists are required to look at all three phases of the project. So construction, operation, and decommissioning. They need to look at impacts in all three phases and also recommend it will be then included in the EMP. The EMP is also a document that is submitted to the department for approval together with the final EIA report. So yes, all three the construction, operation, and decommissioning.
Right, thank you. And I think, just to make sure that the socio-economic impacts on the squid industry will also be investigated, because that's an underlying concern that I've also picked up.
Yeah, definitely. Socioeconomic and marine ecology.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that addresses your concerns and your questions, Salih. But if you have further follow-ups, you're welcome to ask or to get in touch with the team. Right, let's move on to Gary. Thank you for your patience, Gary and Mr. or Mrs. Grobler.
Tony, no problem. I just see in the comments there's a person by the name of Julia, I think it is, that's been trying to ask a question. I'm happy to hold mine if the person's still online. She can't raise her hand on the thing. If we could, is it possible to allow that person?
Thank you. Can
Thank
you
you,
hear me?
Julia. I saw your
Is my
hand and I
microphone-
made a note. Yeah,
Is the microphone
hear you.
working? No. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Actually, my question was long before now. It was in relation to something which was being talked about when that graph, that picture was put up about the different sources of energy that were being planned in the energy plan. And in that plan, it shows that nuclear is 5,200 of the total. And from what I understand, maybe you can correct me, that's the proposed development in Cape Town next to Koeberg is about that level of energy capacity. So why are we, I don't understand the urgency of the current process, because we have to address all the other sections of this circle that you're showing us as well, and plan them in detail and do EIAs and make everything else possible: storage, gas, wind, solar PV, distributed GX. One would assume that all those would be at a very high level of EIA and planning readiness to be equal to the work that was done, which is now being put into the Cape Town, essentially the replacement of Koeberg. So I'm actually, and we've got a situation where Taspint was already rejected by an EIA process. So what is the current, it seems almost like an urgent issue for something which is not even on the map. So what are the real motivations here? Is there something else that we should know about? Is it something to do with Eastern Cape development, possibly, which is overriding everything else and overriding all EIAs, overriding all economics, overriding all plans, which show how much we really need of nuclear? What's actually going on?
Thank you for raising your concerns, Julia. Big concerns. I think they've been raised by many people to date, and I'm going to hand over to Eskom for a response.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks, and a very good question, because I think we have had the question a lot, and there's a lot of uncertainty or misunderstanding around what the plan is. So the 5,200 megawatts is in addition to Koeberg. So Koeberg has just recently received an extension license for the next 20 years. So we do plan on running Koeberg for another 20 years. And then the IRP identified an additional 5,200 megawatts. You're correct. We got an environmental authorization for Danafontein, which is right next to Koeberg. It took us a long time to get that authorization. It was originally issued in 2017, and then it was appealed, and it has taken quite some time for the authorities to eventually rule on the appeal, which they did in July last year, gave us positive under court review. However, we will go through the court review process, and the intention, and it's a phased approach that we plan on taking. These are big construction projects, and to do 5,200 megawatts within a limited period of time and deliver by 2039 as required in terms of the IRP, we would not be able to do all of that at Koeberg. So the Danafontein site is authorized for up to 4,000 megawatts, and the plan is to start at the Dennfontein site with a couple of units, as long as all the authorizations are in place, and that would be then followed by the second site that gets all its various authorizations.
But that's what I don't understand, because you've got 4,000 of the 5,200 covered, right? You only need another 1,200. So why are we?
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense, the maths.
Yeah, if you when she was introducing the different policy processes, she talked about investigation of a nuclear industrial plan, which is looking at investigating up to 10,000 megawatts in total.
Yes, but I mean, that is like the solar can also have another 50,000 and wind can have another 40,000. It's on a similar level of feasibility. It's sort of beyond the circle we're seeing now. There's another circle. But why is the urgency now in developing this outer circle so extensively with nuclear when we've already got a rejected plan at Chasepoint?
Yeah.
Why are we not going back to the drawing board and saying, look, there are many other sites that weren't chosen by the apartheid government, which are more suitable. Let's look at the whole thing holistically, because we only we're only short of 1,200 megawatts, according to my maths. So that's not really a lot. If you look at the whole plan, it doesn't make sense. The whole thing doesn't make sense.
So as I explained, we would be developing two sites because you can't build all of the full 4,000 megawatts at Koeberg within the period that's required. So you do it in a phased approach, and we need more than one site to enable that. Maybe not a dissimilar situation to when we needed new coal to make sure that we could alleviate the load shedding we could see coming. When we built Kusile and Medupi, we planned and developed those sites together. And then just, Julie, the Chasepoint site was never rejected. We looked at two alternative sites. At that stage, it was Dennfontein and Chasepoint, and there was no fatal flaw at Chasepoint. It was just that Dennfontein was identified as the preferred site.
If I can just add,
sorry, I've just one last question, then I won't waste your time anymore. We've got Koeberg itself, which has to be, its life needs to be extended, or we need to have another version of Koeberg. Then we're going to have Dennfontein, which is going to have another at least 4,000 megawatts. And I mean, where are we going to find all the funding? The nuclear costs are, as they said, in the trillions. And before, when Zuma was in power, he tried to push through 10,000 megawatts and get the Rosatom to build it. And the finance minister actually resigned. He said, we can't afford it. And he resigned. He wouldn't sign the documents they tried to force him to sign. But now we're trying to do the same thing.
No,
it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So Sadiqa wanted to add, but this is not the same situation. And Sadiqa, I'm not sure what you're going to answer, but if you could maybe also just talk about the plant parameters, envelope parameters, and that we would be going out to various vendors and not selecting one specific vendor.
Yeah, we haven't selected a specific vendor. I'll start with that, around that, and that's why the plant parameter envelope that we're using in the EIA encapsulates a series of all the different technologies should be able to fit in that. If it doesn't meet our requirements, it will not fit in. We will not be looking at that. There's quite a few different PWR vendors out in the world that's got designs capable of meeting our requirements. So we will assess those when we go through to the open market process. But in terms of just clarification, I wanted to just add in there, to meet the 5,200 megawatts by 2039, we will be constructing on both sites. We cannot place it all in one site. We won't meet that timeline. Therefore, we will be doing the construction on both the Dennfontein and the Chasepoint or Bantamsklip site to meet that objective. And I just wanted to also add that Koeberg is on the Dennfontein site. People often misunderstanding the Koeberg site, but Koeberg is located on the Danafontein site, and next to Koeberg we will be building the other units, and the site is not. The plan is then to build 2 reactors here and 2 reactors in Tuispunt, and that should meet our requirements in the short term. Short term in my term, yeah, in this timeline that we're looking at. Thank you.
So you're saying
Right.
that Danafontein is the replacement for Koeberg, essentially?
No, Koeberg will be continuing to operate for an additional 20 years. We've got a license to extend. We have received the license to operate Koeberg for an additional 20 years. So the new plant will be running in parallel to Koeberg.
So then
As
you're
well.
saying that the 5,200, which is new greenfields, is going to be split over 2 sites.
That
new
is correct.
sites.
That is correct.
Which one of it is Danafontein?
Danafontein has an authorization for 4,000, and we are applying for Tuispunt for 5,200 megawatts. But the limitation that we do have currently is that in terms of the IRP, we will deploy 5,200 megawatts on both sides. Not 5,000 here and 5,000 there. It will be 5,200 split between the 2 sites, and that's really to help manage our risks and help manage the deployment risks associated with the.
But that's the 10,000 megawatts the finance minister resigned about. He said we couldn't afford it.
No, that's not 10,000. It's 5,200.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump in here because I
Yeah.
see we still have 3 hands up, and
Sorry.
I would like to just give our other participants an opportunity as well. What I would like to suggest is that we really that the EIA team just go back to the scoping report and look at the description of this this need for the volume of power that's required, and just clarify that aspect because I do think there's a lot of confusion around that, and we need clarity.
No, thanks, Tony. I respect that. Maybe just a final point, if I can. I think there is confusion around that. But each site that you intend to construct a facility on will need an EIA. And each site will need an EI, and you will need to project a capacity on what you're planning, what it can handle. So for Danafontein, you cannot construct anything on Danafontein without an EI. Likewise, at Tuispunt, you cannot construct anything without an EI. So you need an EI for each site that you need to build up. That's my understanding. Thank you.
But I think the math isn't mapping, and that is something we as stakeholders need to clarity on. So that's what I'm going to say, Julie. Thank you for your inputs. We're really taking that into consideration, and hopefully we can clarify that point. I'm moving on to Gary.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity. Just 2 questions from my side. The one is, if I go to your scoping report and look, or the provisional one, and look at your comments on the socioeconomic study, the summary says that the assessment does not quantify employment, economic benefits, service demands, as it depends on the final project design. And I think, I'm not sure whether Eskom understands it or the applicant understands it, but you've created a paradoxical loop here whereby your envelope is so non-specific that you're unable to know the details of it. And that means that you can't actually do, by your own writing, a proper socioeconomic study. So the question to you would be is, how do you overcome that paradox of that you don't have enough detail to actually plan properly for what happens on the site? So, for instance, you talk about in the thing about the potential of small modular reactors being placed at Tuispunt. That seems not to be the case anymore. It's very indistinct, and I don't think that that's the intent of an EIA process or how the regulations and the law intended it. So that's the first question. The second question is then the socioeconomic study in the summary refers to the NSIP, which I think is the original study done in the 80s about the site allocation and the 5 sites that were there. So it's informed by that study. Now, that study's parameters are no longer relevant. It was based on population, on political divisions, on how the world was understood at that time. That significantly changed in terms of renewables and a whole bunch of other considerations, COVID being one of them. So this community of St. Francis, Cape St. Francis, has radically changed after COVID. So the question would be is why not relook at how you've cited? And if I can mention one specific example, you have the Hydra substation. You have the Hydra substation at close to Gerib Dam. My understanding that's where the Eastern Cape loops in terms of the national grid. That's about 137 k's away from Gerib. It would make sorry, it's difficult to talk when someone else is talking.
Sorry, I can't hear if someone else is talking. Can I just ask if everyone can mute their sound, their mics?
Fantastic, thanks. Thanks, Johnny, appreciate that. So the question would be is the second question would be is why not relook the NSIP given that everything has changed, and why not look at a site like the Hydra substation, which would seem to make far more sense for 5,200 megawatts being supplied into the grid than Tastepoint, which is the furthest point. Well, I mean, you still have to build 120 kilometers extension of grid to get to Tastepoint. So it's the furthest point in your Eastern Cape grid. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks very much. I'm handing over to the E for a response on the first one and then Sadiq on the second one.
Yeah, thanks.
If you need to repeat.
Gary, you always ask the toughest questions. Thanks for that. In terms of the NSIP, the National Siting Investigation Program, which was carried out in the 80s, not everything has changed. And remembering that when we're looking for nuclear facilities, one of the aspects is the cooling with cold seawater, which adds a lot of benefit in terms of efficiency. So that criteria has not changed. And then obviously the seismic aspects were also looked at. Yes, the socioeconomics were looked at, but always when you've done a strategic environmental assessment, the environmental impact assessment would then look at the details. So we did select these sites. We've done a lot of work on these sites. We spent a lot of money on these sites to ensure that they are available if we were to develop nuclear in the future. And that is why we are wanting to develop the sites that we selected some time ago. In terms of the transmission aspect, I think we'll take that comment. I'm definitely, I would be getting into scary territory if I try to answer the grid aspects. But we can take that comment and get our transmission or NTCSA to just confirm what the situation is in terms of grid and grid stability and benefits of where the proposed sites are. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think, the first concern is just how can the EAP assess impacts credibly given the non-specificity of the technology envelope? Brian, I don't know if you
Yes.
or Ashley just want to comment.
Yeah, look, Gary, again, I think it's a valid question, and I think it's always that it looks like it's a black box, but in essence, what has come out of it, and as Sadika said earlier, is with the selection of the various types of technology, available technology, the worst case has been identified in terms of, let's for instance say, cooling requirements, discharge temperatures, heights, etc. So all of the maximum that could fit within this envelope has been identified, and that's what's been passed through to our specialists. Now, what we've done is we've had a number of specialist workshops where all the plant parameter envelope criteria has been discussed, and the specialists have got the opportunity to investigate those values, and then they take those values, irrespective of what for instance, if you're a marine ecologist, you know what is the exit temperatures, what's the maximum discharge volumes. So that is then what is used, that worst case scenario is what is used in the impact assessment. Now, if ultimately, I mean, this is also reflected in the EIA. So if an authorization should be granted, then those parameter envelope specifications are conditions within which any selected technology and associated effects or aspects that will have impact will need to fall. As simple as that. So we've got a very clear vision from a specialist perspective and a goal in terms of what criteria they should be using.
Thank you, Brian. I see that we are on 5 o'clock, folks, and I just need permission for us to carry on for a bit because I'd like to get to the last 3 hands that are up. Gary, please bear with me because I need to get through to Dee Grobler and Karen, who have been very patient with us. Is that okay for us to continue for another 10 minutes? You can just give me a thumbs up. Thank you. Appreciate. Dee Grobler.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Dana Grobler from Cape Town. And I make these comments and questions in my private capacity, not in my professional capacity. My question revolves very much about questions that Gary, Michelle, and Julia has been asking about economic components and evaluation of the risks from an economic perspective. We see, unfortunately, many big construction projects runs into construction difficulties and actually sometimes also fail or completely run over time and over budget. But I do not see adequate evaluation and quantification of the risks associated with the economic and then related back to the environment. A half-completed project or a project that overruns with double the time is surely having a specific impact, and that should be properly quantified and evaluated, that is open and in the public domain. So I would like to see stronger economic considerations and the backlash on the social and the backlash on the environmental component. The whole clarification of 5,200 megawatt, I think Julia has emphasized that point. It's not clear in the documentation, and I don't think that the EIA process can simply refer back to the national planning of electricity supply. This is a specific project-based, construction-based assessment of the risks. I think the environmental work in general is well done, but the economic components are weak and the social economic relationships are not adequately spelled out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We take note of these comments. Perhaps just from the WSP side, can you just give an indication whether this economic study will quantify and qualify the risks associated with the impacts, the economic impacts, as well as the backlash on social and environmental aspects?
Thank you. I would like to see that information, that we can participate with a clear understanding of all the implications. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tony, there's economic impact assessment that is being undertaken as part of the EIA phase. There's also terms of reference in the scoping report in terms of the scope of what they will be looking at. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And the comments that you've raised just now, Dana,
yes,
will definitely be taken into consideration by the specialists, and it will also be, provided to them for evaluation. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Karen.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. So a lot of it has already been spoken about. I think I just want to reiterate a few points. One of my biggest concern is the transmission lines that do not exist and need to be built to generate the power into the NMB municipality. I mean, is that cost even being considered in the economic scoping? It needs to be included. That's the one point. The second point is that if we actually put up RDP houses with solar panels on top of every RDP house, that would take away a lot of the demand for electricity that you're trying to provide. That was another comment. And my last comment is, TSA says that a lot of the power being generated by the wind farms currently in the Eastern Cape is not being bought by Eskom because they could not come to an agreement on this, and is actually being sent to Mozambique. So I'm raising that as a point, and I would like Eskom to come back and confirm what is going on and that they definitely have negotiated a deal with the wind farms. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Karen, and thank you for raising those issues. I think we are going to take note of those and request Eskom to get back to you on your last question. What I just would like the EP to comment on is whether the transmission line cost will be included in the economic impact assessment. You can just give clarity on that, please.
So we do have provisional costing on that, and it will be given to the economic specialists. Yes.
Thank you very much. And Gary.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks for your question.
Gary, you always have the last word.
It's not intentional, Madam Facilitator. You put me at the end, you know.
Sorry. It's just a tongue in the cheek.
Yes, no.
At the end of the day. Thank you.
Yes, I imagine your sense of humor is at a low ebb at this point in time after all these processes.
Yeah.
So if I can just in response to the last ones, the concern I have is when I listen to the EP and when I listen to Eskom. So Eskom talks about Tasman having no fatal flaws in terms of the last assessment. And the EP talks about an envelope that that considers the worst case scenarios. And that's not my understanding of what an EIA is meant to do. My understanding of an EIA is that it is meant to look at whether the development is a sustainable development and take the actual parameters of the development that's proposed and look at it in terms of that environment. So the question to both the EP and the thing, and let me give you an example. So Eskom has said that potentially you could have, because this is a big window, potentially you could have small modular reactors at Taspent. Included in the technology that's under development is gas-cooled SMRs. I see nothing in the plan that refers to gas and how gas will be taken to the site, etc. So the non-specificity of the approach in terms of the envelope means that it's not a worst-case scenario. It's just that simply gas isn't included, but that's a real potential one. So you haven't evaluated all of the options on the table, and therein lies the problem in terms of how the both EP and Eskom are approaching the thing. So the question would be, and just for noting in your project in the scoping report under purpose number 1, in terms of reference there, you talk about environmental and social effects. I'm sure it's just an editorial error, but you don't include economic in that, and sustainable development is those 3. Is the EP convinced? Let me pose it as a question. Is the EP convinced that you are evaluating the sustainable development of a nuclear plant at Taspent?
That's not requiring me to repeat. I'm going to ask the EP to comment and respond. Thank you. Thank you, Gary.
Hi, thanks, Gary, for that. So the plant parameter envelope is a strategy that is used internationally in EIAs, in Canada, the US, and in Europe. So yeah, we are confident that the specialists will be able to look at the process as a whole and the parameter as a whole. The parameter, the envelope, obviously there may be some updates and bits as we go through the process. So it's not currently set in stone. I think that is also important to look at, but it will be by the time we get to the EIA. So yeah, it is an international way that they are doing it overseas. So we are confident. We are confident in that.
Thank you, Gary. I see your hand is up. One last follow-up, I suppose.
I mean, so if I could, and I understand that you're out of time, but if the EAP could point to in the scoping report where you talk about gas and how gas is going to be delivered to the site, could you just? I haven't found it, but I'm struggling through the 2,700 pages. But if the EAP could just indicate where in the report is an evaluation of gas and gas on site.
Thanks, Gary. What we'll do is we'll make sure that that's gas transportation, and you're right, actually gas transportation to site it's not explicitly indicated, but we'll make sure that it's covered in the scoping.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this was a really excellent session. We really appreciate your active participation and your patience and listening to this. I think in many aspects, your comments raised, your input, your written comments in the chat are extremely valuable and will definitely be considered by the specialists. I would like to thank you for your time. And then we will be back in Gqeberha on Monday, what is Monday? It's the 11th of May. There will be a public meeting in Gqeberha at the Vulindlela Conference Center from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening. Please join us there, and then you are welcome to also submit questions or comments up to the 25th of May, but all comments, if they are submitted after the 25th of May, they will still be included as part of the impact assessment phase process. But we really encourage you to send in your comments. Thank you for your patience. Travel safely if you have to travel, and have a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.